Hey, Reddit. I never thought I'd be here sharing this, but I don't know what else to do. My wife, Pam, and I have been married for 17 years. For the longest time, I thought we had one of those rock-solid marriages you hear about, one built on mutual respect, love, and trust. Turns out, I've been living in a fantasy. Things weren't always like this. Early on, we had the usual ups and downs, but I always believed we were in it together. We were a team. I'd come home from work, and even if we were tired or stressed, we'd find a way to connect. Lately though, things have been different. At first, it was subtle. Pam seemed distracted, her answers short when I'd ask about her day. Date nights stopped happening, and when I tried to suggest one, she'd tell me she was too tired or had work to do. I convinced myself it was just a rough patch. Everyone goes through them, right? Marriage isn't always fireworks and romance. But then she started acting strange. She'd guard her phone like it was her lifeline. Suddenly, she had late-night work meetings that didn't seem to fit her normal schedule. And if I asked about them, she'd get defensive. I started to feel like I was the problem, like I was being paranoid or clingy. The worst part? She started lying. Little things at first, forgetting she'd told me something different the week before or covering up something that didn't even need hiding. It felt like I was constantly second-guessing myself. Was she lying, or was I imagining things? Then came the night everything changed. I couldn't shake this gut feeling that something wasn't right. Pam had another one of her late-night meetings, but something about her tone when she left made my stomach churn. So I did something I'm not proud of. I followed her. It felt wrong, like I was crossing a line, but I needed answers. I watched her drive across town to a small restaurant we'd been to once years ago. She parked, got out, and walked in with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, well-dressed, and the way she smiled at him, it was a smile I hadn't seen from her in years. My heart sank. I didn't go in. I couldn't. I just sat there in my car, staring through the windshield, trying to process what I was seeing. When she came out 2 hours later, she didn't even look around, just leaned in and hugged him, her hand lingering on his back longer than it should have. Then they both left in separate cars. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight they hurt. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her the second she walked in the door, but another part of me needed more proof. That's where I'm at now, Reddit. I'm sitting in my living room, waiting for her to come home, and I don't know how to approach this. Do I call her out on it? Do I try to find out more before confronting her? I'm scared to know the full extent of what's been going on, but I can't keep living in this limbo. If anyone's been through something like this, I could use some advice. How do you even begin to confront someone you've loved for nearly 2 decades about something like this? I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the clock tick closer to midnight. Pam still wasn't home, and my mind was running wild. Was she with him? Were they laughing at me, knowing I was sitting here clueless? Every possible scenario played out in my head, and each one felt worse than the last. Around 12:30, I finally heard the garage door open. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might jump out of my chest. Pam walked in, looking tired but strangely calm, like she'd just finished a normal day at work. "Hey," she said casually, kicking off her shoes by the door. "You're still up." I couldn't help it, the words just tumbled out. "How was your meeting?" Her eyes darted to mine, and I could see the faintest flicker of hesitation before she responded. "It was fine. We went over some new account strategies. You didn't have to wait up." She was lying. I knew it. "What restaurant did you meet at?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. She froze for a second, just long enough for me to notice. "We didn't go to a restaurant," she said, grabbing a glass of water from the kitchen. "Why are you asking me that?" My hands clenched into fists on my lap. "Because I followed you, Pam. I saw you at that little Italian place. With him." The glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. She didn't even flinch, just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know what to say. "Charlie, I can explain," she finally said, her voice shaky. I stood up, trying to keep myself calm, but the anger was bubbling under the surface. "Then explain, Pam. Who is he? What's going on?" She shook her head, her hands trembling as she started to pick up the broken glass. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "Because from where I'm standing, It looks like my wife is sneaking around behind my back. She stopped and looked up at me, tears forming in her eyes. He's just a colleague, Charlie. We were discussing a project. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overreact. Overreact. I laughed bitterly. You lied to me. You've been lying for months, haven't you? Don't sit there and tell me it's my fault for noticing. Her tears started to fall then, but they didn't soften me. I couldn't tell if they were real or just another layer of manipulation. It's not like that, she said again, but her voice cracked. Then what is it like, Pam? I pressed. Because I'm done playing this game where you gaslight me into thinking I'm crazy. I saw the way you looked at him. I haven't seen you look at me like that in years. She stood up, her face pale. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered, her voice barely audible. And just like that, my world came crashing down when Pam said, I didn't mean for it to happen. Something inside me shattered. That was all the confirmation I needed, even if I didn't know the full extent yet. What didn't you mean, Pam? I said, my voice calm but cold. Go ahead. Spell it out for me. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was shielding herself from what was coming. It was just, I don't know. It started as harmless conversations, you know? He was just easy to talk to, and I didn't think it was a big deal. My stomach turned, but I didn't interrupt. I needed to hear everything. We got close, and I don't know, it felt nice having someone pay attention to me. I never meant for it to go this far, Charlie. I swear. I laughed bitterly. How far, Pam? What does this far mean? Did you sleep with him? She looked horrified. No, it never got to that point. Then what? You've been meeting him secretly, lying to me for months. Don't sit there and pretend like this is nothing. It wasn't nothing, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. But I stopped it, okay? I told him we couldn't keep doing this. I've been trying to fix things between us, Charlie, I swear. I was stunned. Fix things? That's what she thought this was? You've been trying to fix things while sneaking off to have dinner with him? That's your idea of fixing things. It was just one dinner, she pleaded. We haven't seen each other in weeks, and tonight I told him it's really over. I came home, didn't I? I chose you. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. You chose me. I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Like I'm some consolation prize? She didn't respond. The silence was deafening. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. So what happens now, Pam? You think we just go back to normal? That I forget you've been lying to me, sneaking around, and emotionally cheating on me with another man? I'll do whatever it takes, she said, stepping closer to me. I'll quit my job. I'll block his number. I'll go to therapy. Just, please don't give up on us. I shook my head, backing away. I need some time to think, Pam. I can't make any decisions right now. She started crying harder, but I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her sobbing in the middle of the kitchen. I drove aimlessly for hours that night, my thoughts racing. I kept replaying everything Pam had said, trying to make sense of it all. Was she telling the truth? Had it really not gone that far? Or was she just saying what she thought I wanted to hear? At some point, I found myself parked outside my best friend David's house. It was almost 2 a.m., but I couldn't go home. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of this mess. David opened the door in his pajamas, looking confused. Charlie? What's going on? Are you okay? No, I said bluntly, stepping inside. I don't even know where to start, man. He poured us both a drink and sat down across from me, waiting for me to speak. It's Pam, I finally said. She's been lying to me. She's been seeing another guy. David's expression shifted from confusion to anger. Are you serious? What did she say? I explained everything, how I'd followed her, what I saw, and the conversation we'd had when she got home. By the time I finished, David looked ready to punch a wall. She's unbelievable, he said. And you're telling me she's trying to act like she's the victim in all of this? Yeah, I said bitterly. She says she's willing to do anything to make it right, but I don't know if I can believe her. Or if I even want to. David leaned forward, his tone serious. Look, man, you need to figure out what you want. Do you think you can ever trust her again? Because without trust, there's no marriage. It's that simple. His words hit me hard because deep down, I knew he was right. But trust? That felt like a distant memory. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Pam with Brad, the way she looked at him, the lies she'd told, the months of my life that suddenly felt like a sham. By morning, I was exhausted, but I'd made up my mind. I needed answers. Not more excuses, not more tears. I needed the truth. When Pam came downstairs, her eyes were puffy, and her face was pale. She tried to say something, but I cut her off. "Brad," I said bluntly. "I want to know everything about him." Her shoulders sagged, and she sat down across from me at the kitchen table. "I told you everything, Charlie. It's over." I leaned forward, my hands clenched into fists on the table. "No, Pam. You told me just enough to stop me from leaving, but it's not enough. I need the truth. Did he know you were married? Did he know about me?" She nodded slowly, avoiding my eyes. "Yes, he knew." I laughed bitterly. "So he didn't care. Great. What about you? Did you ever tell him we were having problems? Or did you just let him believe our marriage wasn't worth anything?" She shook her head quickly. "I never said that. I told him we were going through a rough patch, but I also told him I wasn't leaving you. Did he believe that?" I asked, my voice rising. Because it sure doesn't seem like he cared what kind of mess he was making in our lives. Pam looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes again. "It wasn't like that, Charlie. He wasn't trying to ruin anything. I slammed my hand on the table, cutting her off. "Stop defending him." I snapped. "He knew you were married, and he still went for it. And you let him." She flinched, but I didn't care. I was done playing the understanding husband. "I want to know why," I said finally, my voice quieter but no less intense. "Why him? What did he have that I didn't?" Pam hesitated, staring down at her hands. "It wasn't about that," she said softly. "It was." I felt invisible, Charlie. Like we were just going through the motions. He noticed me. He listened. He made me feel. "Don't you dare say he made you feel special," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "That's my job, Pam. That's supposed to be our thing." She started crying again, and for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. I just felt empty. "Do you love him?" I asked after a long pause. Her head shot up, her eyes wide. "No. God, no. It wasn't like that." "Then what was it?" I pressed. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was stupid. Lonely. I made a mistake, Charlie. Please believe me." I stood up, shaking my head. "It's not about what I believe anymore, Pam. It's about what I can live with. And right now, I don't know if I can live with this." She reached out for me again, but I pulled away. "I need time," I said firmly. "And you need to decide what the hell you want, because I'm not going to keep fighting for something you don't care about." And with that, I left the room, leaving her sobbing at the kitchen table. The silence in the house after I walked out was deafening. I thought leaving the conversation would give me some clarity, but all it did was fill my head with more questions. Pam said it was over with Brad, but how could I trust her? She'd lied to me for months. What was stopping her from lying now? I spent the day wrestling with my thoughts, trying to figure out my next move. By evening, I decided I needed more than just Pam's side of the story. I needed to know what I was really up against. So, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I was going to confront Brad. I found his name on LinkedIn, and it didn't take long to track down his profile. He looked exactly like I remembered, clean-cut, polished, the kind of guy who probably practiced his smile in the mirror. His profile listed the company where he and Pam worked, along with his email address. I debated whether to send him a message or show up at his office, but I didn't want to risk making a scene. Instead, I wrote him a short email. Subject: "We need to talk. Hi Brad. You don't know me, but I'm Pam's husband, Charlie. I'd like to have a conversation with you about what's been going on. Please let me know when and where we can meet. Charlie." I hit send and sat back, my heart pounding. I wasn't sure if he'd respond, but to my surprise, he replied within the hour. Subject: "We need to talk. Hi Charlie. I understand why you want to talk, and I'm willing to meet. Let me know a time and place. Brad." There was something smug about his response, though I couldn't put my finger on it. I decided to meet him at a coffee shop near his office the next day. When I arrived, Brad was already there, sipping on a latte like he didn't have a care in the world. He stood up when he saw me, extending a hand. I ignored it and sat down across from him. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. Brad leaned back in his chair, studying me with a smirk. "I figured you'd reach out eventually. What do you want to know?" I clenched my fists under the table, resisting the urge to punch him right then and there. "I want the truth," I said evenly. "I want to know what happened between you and my wife, and I want to know if it's really over." Brad took a long sip of his latte, clearly enjoying the power he thought he had in this situation. "Look, Charlie, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Pam and I had a connection. She's an amazing woman, and I think you know that. But it's over now. She made her choice, and she chose you." The way he said it, like Pam had done me a favor, made my blood boil. "Why didn't you walk away when you knew she was married?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. Brad shrugged, unfazed. "I didn't think it was my place to make that decision for her. If she was unhappy, that was between you two. I just stepped in when the opportunity presented itself." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. This guy didn't care about me, my marriage, or the damage he'd caused. He'd just seen an opening and taken it. "Let me be clear," I said, leaning forward. "If you ever contact her again, I will make sure you regret it. Do you understand me?" Brad's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Message received," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. I stood up, my chest heaving with anger. "Stay away from my wife," I said, my voice low and firm. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. Brad wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. And something told me he wasn't going to let go of Pam as easily as he claimed. The confrontation with Brad didn't give me the closure I was hoping for. If anything, it left me with more questions, and a gnawing sense of unease. I could tell he wasn't finished with Pam, no matter what he claimed. When I got home, Pam was waiting for me, her face pale and tense. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice quiet but wary. "I went to see Brad," I said bluntly, throwing my keys onto the counter. Her eyes widened, and she looked like I'd slapped her. "You what?" "I wanted to hear his side of the story," I said, crossing my arms. "And guess what? He doesn't seem to think it's as over as you say it is." She shook her head, her hands wringing nervously. "Charlie, I don't know what he told you, but I've cut off all contact with him. I promise." "Then why do I feel like there's more you're not telling me?" I asked, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months, Pam. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "There is more, isn't there?" I said, my heart sinking. She looked away, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It wasn't just a couple of kisses," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "What does that mean?" Pam took a shaky breath, her hands trembling. We got closer than we should have. We talked about things we shouldn't have, personal things, private things about our marriage. And one night, we almost." She trailed off, but she didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew what she was trying to say. I slammed my hand down on the counter, the anger boiling over. "Are you kidding me, Pam? You almost? What does that even mean? Did you sleep with him or not?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I swear we didn't." I stopped it before it went that far. But it doesn't change the fact that I let it get too far. Her words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. I felt like I was standing in the wreckage of a life I didn't even recognize anymore. "You gave him access to our marriage," I said, my voice cold. "You let him into something that was supposed to be sacred. Do you have any idea how that feels?" She sobbed into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. This was her mess. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I don't know if I can get past this, Pam. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed us. You betrayed everything we built." She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Charlie. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on me. On us." But I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just walked out of the room, her cries echoing behind me, and shut the door. I needed space to think. To breathe. To figure out if there was even a way forward from here. For the next few days, Pam and I barely spoke. I avoided her as much as possible, spending most of my time at work or driving aimlessly around town just to be away from the house. I felt like a stranger in my own life, walking through the ruins of something I used to be proud of. Pam sent me a text one evening while I was sitting in my car in an empty parking lot. Pam, can we talk tonight? I know I've hurt you, but I need you to know something. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Me, fine. I'll be home soon. When I got back, Pam was sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of her. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked exhausted. What's all this? I asked, nodding toward the papers. It's everything, she said quietly. Texts, emails, everything between me and Brad. I printed it all out. I want you to see for yourself. I hesitated, unsure if I even wanted to dig into this. Why now? Because I need you to know the truth, she said, her voice trembling. All of it. I know I've lied to you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I can't move forward unless you know everything. I sat down across from her and started flipping through the pages. At first, it was mostly work-related messages, cordial, professional. But then the tone started to shift. Brad, you looked amazing today. That dress is dangerous. Pam, haha, stop. You're going to get me in trouble. Brad, trouble can be fun, don't you think? The messages were flirtatious at first, but as I kept reading, they became more intimate. He confided in her about his personal life, his struggles, his ambitions. She responded with empathy, encouragement, and eventually, feelings of her own. Pam, I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like you see me in a way no one else does. Even Charlie. Brad, that's because I do see you, Pam. You deserve to feel special every day. My stomach turned as I read those words. She had poured out her heart to this man, shared things that should have been reserved for me. It felt like 1,000 little betrayals, each one cutting deeper than the last. Then I found the message that stopped me cold. Brad, if you leave him, we could have something real. You know that, right? Pam, I can't do that. I love Charlie. But I don't know how to fix this. I put the papers down and looked at her. You told him you loved me, but you kept going back to him. Why? She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't know, Charlie. I was stupid and selfish. I let myself get caught up in something I didn't know how to stop. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a few bad decisions. This was a pattern, a series of choices that had systematically dismantled our marriage. You said it was over, I said, my voice cold. But he was asking you to leave me. When did it really end, Pam? After I caught you. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. After you confronted me, I told him I couldn't see or talk to him again. And I haven't. I wanted to believe her, but trust was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Then why did you save these? I asked, gesturing to the papers. To show you I'm not hiding anything anymore, she said, looking me in the eye for the first time. To prove that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, even if it means exposing every horrible mistake I've made. I didn't say anything for a long time. I wasn't sure if this was the start of healing or just another manipulation. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living in limbo. I need time, I said finally, standing up. And I need space. I don't know what the future holds, Pam, but right now, I can't even look at you without seeing him. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. Take all the time you need, Charlie. I'll wait. I didn't respond. I just walked out the door, leaving her with her tears and her regrets. The next few weeks were a blur. I stayed at a hotel at first, then crashed at a friend's house when I couldn't stomach the loneliness of those sterile walls. My friend Mark tried to help keep my mind off things, but no matter what I did, the betrayal followed me like a shadow. Pam texted me every day, sometimes apologizing, sometimes just asking if I was okay. I rarely responded. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk to her, it was that I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to someone that they've broken something in you that might never heal? One evening, I got a call from Pam's sister, Laura. She and I had always gotten along, and I could tell from her tone that she was worried. Charlie, she said gently, I know you're hurting, and I'm not calling to defend Pam. But, she's not doing well. She's blaming herself for everything, rightfully so, but I'm worried about where her head's at. I sighed, leaning back on Mark's couch. What do you want me to do, Laura? She made this mess. I can't fix it for her. I know, Laura said. But I think you should know that Brad's still reaching out to her. My stomach dropped. What? She hasn't responded, Laura added quickly. But he's been sending her messages, asking to meet. She showed me, Charlie. She wants me to tell you so you know she's not hiding anything. I didn't know what to feel, anger, exhaustion, or just sheer disbelief that this man was still trying to insert himself into our lives. I don't care what he wants, I said through gritted teeth. I told him to stay away, and I meant it. Pam's scared, Laura said softly. She doesn't know what to do. And honestly, I think she's hoping you'll tell her. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to call Brad and tell him exactly what I thought of him. Another part of me wanted to tell Pam to handle it herself. After all, this was a problem she created. Thanks for letting me know, I said finally. But I need to think about how I want to deal with this. After he hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, torn between anger and a strange lingering sense of responsibility. As much as I hated what Pam had done, I couldn't shake the feeling that Brad wasn't finished with her, or me. The next morning, I made my decision. I sent Pam a text. I'll meet you. Tomorrow evening. But not at the house. Let's meet somewhere neutral. She responded almost immediately. Pam, thank you, Charlie. You don't know how much this means to me. The next day, we met at a park near the edge of town. It was quiet, with just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Pam looked different, tired, fragile, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. I heard Brad's been messaging you, I said without preamble. She nodded, biting her lip. I didn't respond, Charlie. I swear. I believe you, I said, surprising myself. But that doesn't change the fact that he's not letting go. And I can't move forward if I feel like he's still lurking in the background. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I'll block him. I'll do whatever it takes. I want to make this right, Charlie. Even if it takes the rest of my life. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know what the future holds, Pam. But if you're serious about fixing this, it's going to take more than just blocking him. You need to figure out why this happened in the first place, and how to make sure it never happens again. She nodded, her tears spilling over. I will. I promise. As I walked away from that meeting, I felt the smallest glimmer of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the road for us. After our meeting in the park, I decided to give Pam the chance to prove herself. She blocked Brad on every platform, sent him an email telling him to never contact her again, and even showed me the confirmation that he'd been removed from her work projects. I could tell she was trying, but trust is a funny thing, it doesn't just snap back into place. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. Then, about 2 weeks later, Pam called me while I was at work. She sounded panicked. Charlie, she said, her voice shaking. He came to the house. Who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Brad, she said, almost in a whisper. He showed up this morning. I didn't let him in, but he wouldn't leave. He kept saying he just wanted to talk. My chest tightened, and my grip on the phone hardened. Did you call the police? I was about to, but he left before I could, she said quickly. I swear, I didn't let him in, Charlie. I didn't even talk to him. I just told him to leave through the door. Why didn't you call me? I snapped. I didn't want to drag you into this again, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. Pam, if he shows up again, you call me immediately. Do you understand? She agreed, and I hung up, but I couldn't focus on anything for the rest of the day. The thought of Brad standing on the porch of the house where we built our life made my blood boil. That night, I decided I couldn't just sit back and wait for him to make his next move. I called a friend of mine, Greg, who worked in private security. I need a favor, I said after explaining the situation. Greg didn't hesitate. Send me his name and any details you have. I'll see what I can dig up. The next day, Greg called me back. Your guy has a history, he said bluntly. I found a couple of restraining orders filed by women he's worked with in the past. Nothing recent, but enough to raise red flags. My stomach churned. So this isn't the first time he's crossed the line? Doesn't seem like it, Greg said. And from what I found, he's good at towing the line, just enough to make people uncomfortable without giving them enough to press charges. Hearing that confirmed what I already suspected. Brad wasn't just a problem. He was a threat. I relayed the information to Pam, who looked genuinely shaken. I had no idea, she said, her hands trembling. You need to be careful, I warned her. This guy isn't just some flirtatious coworker. He's dangerous. Pam nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. What do we do? She asked quietly. We start documenting everything, I said. Every call, every message, every time he shows up. And if he crosses the line again, we go to the police. Pam agreed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. Brad wasn't just a ghost from our past. He was a storm on the horizon. And I had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. A few days after Brad showed up at the house, Pam called me in a panic again. Charlie, he sent me an email, she said, her voice trembling. What did it say? I asked, already bracing myself. He apologized for coming to the house, she said, her words stumbling over each other. But then he said he still thinks we have unfinished business and wants me to meet him, just one last time to clear the air. I clenched my jaw, my anger bubbling over. And you haven't responded, right? Of course not. Pam said quickly. I blocked him everywhere. I didn't even read the whole thing, I just forwarded it to you. Sure enough, the email was sitting in my inbox. I opened it and skimmed the contents, my fury growing with every sentence. Brad's tone was calm, even friendly, but there was a possessiveness in his words that made my skin crawl. I'll be in town next week, he wrote. I'd really like to see you, Pam. You owe me that much, don't you? Owe him? The audacity of it made my blood boil. Pam, we need to report this, I said firmly. To who? She asked, her voice breaking. The police won't do anything unless he does something threatening, and technically he hasn't. She was right, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. I decided to forward the email to Greg, my friend in private security, to see if he had any advice. A few hours later, Greg called me back. This guy's playing games, he said. He wants control. If Pam ignores him, it'll frustrate him, and he might escalate. But if she engages, it's exactly what he wants. So what do we do? I asked, running a hand through my hair. Stay ahead of him, Greg said. Document everything, like I told you. And if he shows up again, call the police immediately. Even if they don't press charges, it'll create a paper trail. That night, I sat down with Pam to come up with a plan. We agreed she wouldn't respond to Brad under any circumstances, and she'd start carrying pepper spray and a personal alarm, just in case. I also made it clear that she wasn't to go anywhere alone, especially not to places Brad might know about. Pam nodded along, but I could see the toll this was taking on her. She looked like a shell of the woman I'd married, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. This isn't your fault, I said quietly, surprising even myself. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. But it is, Charlie. I let him into our lives. I let it get this far. I didn't respond. Maybe she was right. Or maybe Brad would have found a way to insert himself into someone else's life if it hadn't been ours. Either way, the damage was done, and now we had to deal with it. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that Brad wasn't going to give up without a fight. Week passed without any word from Brad. Pam and I both tried to get back to some kind of normal, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every time her phone buzzed, I'd catch her flinching, as if she expected it to be him. Then, late one evening, the silence shattered. Pam was in the living room, reading, while I was cleaning up after dinner. Her phone rang, and the sharp tone of it made us both jump. She grabbed it, her face draining of color when she looked at the screen. It's an unknown number, she said, her voice trembling. Don't answer it, I said quickly, walking over to her. She nodded and let the call go to voicemail. A minute later, her phone dinged with a new voicemail notification. Pam stared at the screen, her hand hovering like she didn't want to touch it. Play it, I said, my stomach knotting. She pressed the button, and Brad's voice filled the room. Pam, it's me. I know you're trying to shut me out, but I just need to talk to you. You don't have to respond, I just wanted you to know that I still care about you. I don't understand why you're letting Charlie control everything. We both know you deserve better. Pam's hand flew to her mouth as the message ended, and I could see the panic rising in her eyes. "This has to stop," I said, my voice hard. "He's not going to just go away." "I didn't tell him anything," Pam said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "I swear, Charlie. I've blocked him everywhere. I don't know how he even got my number." I believed her, but that didn't make it any less infuriating. Brad was crossing lines now, lines he had no business crossing. The next morning, I called Greg and told him what had happened. "He's starting to get bold," I said. "We need to do something before this gets out of hand." Greg agreed and suggested we set up a surveillance system around the house. He offered to help install cameras and motion sensors so we'd have evidence if Brad tried anything else. By the end of the day, our house was covered. Cameras at the front and back doors, motion detectors in the driveway, and even a doorbell camera that captured audio. "It's not a perfect solution," Greg said, packing up his tools. "But if he shows up again, you'll have proof. And proof is what the cops need to take this seriously." I thanked him, though it felt like a small comfort. Brad hadn't broken any laws yet, but his persistence felt like a ticking time bomb. That night, as Pam and I sat in the dim light of the living room, she reached for my hand. I hesitated but didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry, Charlie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For all of this." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her that she was the one who'd opened the door to Brad in the first place. But another part of me knew that wouldn't solve anything. "I don't know how this ends," I said finally. "But I'm not going to let him ruin our lives any more than he already has." Pam nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Neither will I." But as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't help but wonder if we were already too late. The next couple of days were eerily quiet. Pam and I tried to go about our routines, but everything felt tense, like we were waiting for the other shoe to drop. I started checking the surveillance footage obsessively, convinced that Brad was going to show up again. Then one evening, I came home to find Pam sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes wide with fear. "He sent another email," she said, sliding her laptop toward me. I opened it and started reading, my anger boiling with every word. "Brad. Pam, I'm sorry for how things have gone between us. I didn't mean to cause you stress. I just wanted you to know how much you mean to me. If you won't talk to me, I'll have to find another way to make things right. I can't just walk away from this. You deserve better than what Charlie is giving you. I'll prove it to you." I slammed the laptop shut and took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "This has gone too far," I said, my voice shaking. Pam nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do?" "We go to the police," I said firmly. "This is harassment. Maybe they won't do much, but at least we'll have it on record." Pam agreed, and the next morning, we went to the station. The officer we spoke to was sympathetic but clear, without direct threats or physical actions. There wasn't much they could do. "Keep documenting everything," the officer said, "and let us know if he escalates. The more evidence you have, the better your case will be if it comes to that." It wasn't the reassurance I'd been hoping for, but at least it felt like a step in the right direction. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the cameras, half expecting to see Brad lurking outside. Around 2 a.m., just as I was about to give up and go to bed, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the doorbell camera. Someone was at the front door. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, my heart pounding in my chest. Sure enough, there he was, Brad, standing on the porch, his face partially obscured by the hood of his jacket. I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs, grabbing the baseball but I kept in the closet. Pam came rushing out of the bedroom, her eyes wide. "What's going on?" "He's here," I said, my voice cold. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure he knows he's not welcome here." I threw open the door, the bat clenched tightly in my hand. Brad took a step back, his hands raised defensively. "Charlie, I just want to talk," he said, his tone calm but unnervingly smug. "This isn't a conversation," I snapped. "You need to leave. Now." "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, glancing past me toward the house. "I just want to see Pam. I think we both know she deserves to have a say in this." "She's already had her say," I growled. "And she chose to cut you out of her life. You're done here." Brad's eyes narrowed, his calm facade cracking. "You don't get to make that decision for her, Charlie. Maybe if you treated her better, she wouldn't have needed me in the first place. That was it. I stepped forward, my grip on the bat tightening. If I see you near my house or my wife again, I'll make sure you regret it. Do you understand me? For a moment, Brad just stared at me, his jaw clenched. Then, with a smirk that made my blood boil, he turned and walked away. I stood there on the porch, watching him disappear into the night, my heart pounding in my chest. When I went back inside, Pam was waiting for me, her face pale. What did he say? Nothing that matters, I said, setting the bat down. But he's not going to stop, Pam. This isn't over. And deep down, I knew I was right. The encounter with Brad left me on edge. I couldn't stop replaying his smug expression and the way he tried to twist everything, as if he was the victim in all of this. Pam was shaken too, but she was trying to stay strong. She started looking into restraining orders, though the process was complicated, and we weren't sure if we had enough evidence to make it stick. Meanwhile, Greg offered to monitor our house remotely for a while, in case Brad tried anything else. For a few days, nothing happened. Then, on a rainy Friday night, it all came crashing down. Pam and I were sitting in the living room, trying to distract ourselves with a movie, when Greg called. "Charlie, you need to check your cameras right now," he said, his tone urgent. I pulled out my phone and opened the app, my heart racing. The feed from the backyard camera came up, and there he was, Brad, standing near the edge of the property, just outside the fence. What the hell is he doing? I muttered, my pulse pounding in my ears. Pam leaned over, her face pale as she stared at the screen. Why is he back there? Stay inside, I said, grabbing the bat again. I'll handle this. No, Charlie, Pam said, grabbing my arm. We should call the police. We will, I said. But I'm not going to let him just stand there and intimidate us. I stepped out into the rain, my grip tight on the bat. The backyard was dark, the only light coming from the motion-activated floodlights we'd installed. As I approached the fence, Brad turned to face me, a twisted grin on his face. What are you doing here, Brad? I shouted over the rain. I just wanted to talk, he said, his tone infuriatingly casual. But I guess you don't like conversations, do you? This isn't a conversation, I said through gritted teeth. You're trespassing, and I've had enough of your games. Leave. Now. Brad stepped closer to the fence, his hands raised as if in surrender. You don't get it, do you, Charlie? Pam deserves better than you. She knows it. I know it. The only reason she's still here is because she's scared of what you'll do if she leaves. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. You don't know anything about us, I said coldly. And you sure as hell don't belong here. Don't I? He asked, his grin widening. I was part of her life long before you even realized something was wrong. You think you can just erase me? That was it. I raised the bat, ready to drive him off for good, but before I could take another step, I heard Pam's voice behind me. Stop, she shouted, running toward us. Pam, go back inside, I said, my eyes never leaving Brad. But she didn't listen. She stopped a few feet behind me, her voice trembling. Brad, this has to end. Whatever you think is between us, it's over. It's been over. Brad's grin faltered, and for a moment, he looked almost defeated. But then he straightened up, his eyes narrowing. You don't mean that, he said. I know you don't. I do, Pam said firmly, stepping closer. I made mistakes, big ones, but they were my mistakes, and I'm trying to fix them. That doesn't include you. Brad's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might try to climb the fence. But then he took a step back, his hands dropping to his sides. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and venomous. Both of you will. And then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Pam and I stood there in the rain, neither of us saying a word. When we finally went back inside, I called the police and filed another report. This is the last time, I said as we sat at the kitchen table, dripping wet. If he comes back, I'm pressing charges. No more chances. Pam nodded, her face pale and drawn. I'm so sorry, Charlie, she whispered. For everything. I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy. All I could do was hope that this nightmare was finally coming to an end. A week passed after Brad's ominous warning, and for the first time in months, things felt calm. Pam and I were cautious but determined to regain a sense of normalcy. She started therapy, both individual and couple sessions, as a step toward rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. I wasn't sure if it was enough, but at least it felt like progress. Then one evening, as I was sitting on the back porch, my phone buzzed. It was Greg. "Charlie," he said, his voice tight. "I just got a hit on your cameras. You're going to want to check the footage." My stomach dropped. "What did you see?" "Just look," Greg said. I opened the app and pulled up the footage. There it was, Brad, standing in the backyard again, but this time he wasn't alone. He had a can of spray paint in his hand, and he was scrawling something on the side of the house. I didn't even wait to finish the video. I grabbed my keys and ran inside to tell Pam. "He's back," I said, my voice tight with anger. "And he's vandalizing the house." Pam's face went pale. "What do we do?" "We're calling the cops," I said, already dialing. By the time the police arrived, Brad was long gone, but the words he'd spray-painted on the house were impossible to miss. "You'll regret this." The officers took our statement and reviewed the footage. This time, there was no doubt that Brad had crossed the line. They assured us they'd issue a warrant for his arrest and told us to be cautious until they could track him down. That night, as Pam and I sat in the living room, the weight of everything hit me. "This has to stop," I said, my voice heavy. "We can't keep living like this." Pam nodded, her eyes red from crying. "I know, Charlie. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." The next day, I got a call from the police. They'd arrested Brad early that morning at his apartment. He'd confessed to the vandalism and was being held on charges of trespassing, harassment, and property damage. Hearing that should have been a relief, but I felt strangely hollow. This man had nearly destroyed my life, but now that he was out of the picture, I realized that the real work was just beginning. Pam and I spent the next few months in therapy, unpacking everything that had led to this point. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought about walking away for good. But over time, something shifted. Pam was committed, truly committed, to earning back my trust. She opened up in ways she never had before, sharing her insecurities, her regrets, and her determination to be a better partner. I was honest about my own struggles too, how her betrayal had broken something in me, but also how I wanted to believe we could rebuild. It took nearly a year, but eventually, we found a new rhythm. It wasn't the same as before. There were scars that would never fully fade, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. As for Brad, he accepted a plea deal and moved out of state shortly after his release. I haven't heard from him since, and I hope I never do. Looking back, I don't know if I'd call this a happy ending, but it's an ending. And sometimes, that's the best you can hope for. Thanks for sticking with me through this, Reddit. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that healing isn't a straight line. But it's possible, even when it feels impossible.